Right, hello, welcome and hola to everybody. My name is Kora Korzec. I'm head of engagement, community engagement and communications at Crossref. And together with my colleagues, Isaac Farley and Amanda French, we'll talk a little bit today about building the research nexus together with our kind of research and scholarly community. Thank you very much for joining us today for this webinar. I hope it will be useful. Please put your questions in the chat or the Q&A panel, and we'll be trying to get to them throughout the session, or if we can't, then we certainly will have plenty of time for questions at the end, and we'll try to answer all of your queries. All right. So now I'll start, maybe before we jump into talking about the research nexus, let me have a very quick summary or introduction to Crossref for everyone here, if anyone has not been familiar with us before. So Crossref is not just about DOIs. I hope that is not coming as a surprise to most of you, but still, we are not defined by any of the services that we provide or any specific activity, but more by our position in the scholarly communications environment and ecosystem, and our role in making it better. So our mission is to make research outputs easy to find, cite, link, assess, and reuse. And we are a non-for-profit membership organization that exists to make the scholarly communications better. So now a little bit of a Crossref in numbers. There will be no quiz at the end, so no need to memorize them. But still, I think they are quite impressive. At least they have been. I've joined the organization last year, and I have definitely been very impressed with the scale it operates on. So Crossref is a global organization with more than 20,000 organizations across the world that are members and affiliates of, in our network. That spans 150 countries, although I might have heard 151 now. So it's always growing. And we are now approaching 150 million. I think we're at 148 million records or content items that have been registered with us by now, and that constitutes anything from journal articles to books, book chapters, data sets, and most recently also grants, and many things in between, reports, standards, and all the like. So this is just to mention the kind of the breadth of different types of records that we hold. And when members register their content with us, they create a DOI, or a digital object identifier. And we collect metadata that describes that object or that piece of content. And then when we have it, we can process that metadata so that connections can be made between the publications and people and institutions and other associated outputs as well. And we preserve that metadata and the metadata that we receive from our members, and we make it openly available to both humans and machines that wish to use it. And as a result, we receive over 600 million queries a month on, querying that data, trying to learn insights from that big metadata corpus. And the DOI links that you can see in publications or that you browse, we receive more than 1 billion clicks, or what we call resolutions, on those every month now. And that kind of just to picture the scale of where we are in terms of building the big kind of network of connections. And why organizations join Crossref? Well, with that vast database and as I say, kind of enabling us also to make connections between works. Joining Crossref and registering your content with us means that you connect with that global network of scholarly research or content available online. Obviously, you can create persistent identifiers, which I've already mentioned how it's done, and you can improve this. We help organizations improve discoverability of their publications, but also finding out the citations for your content. And by joining Crossref, also the organizations can participate in many different collaborative services and initiatives that Crossref offers. So this is in a nutshell of who we are. So now I just wanted to have a quick question, just so I know if I'm preaching to the converted or to otherwise. Please, if you can answer the question is, are you familiar, or rather, have you been familiar with Crossref before this session? You can raise your hand to say that you have been familiar with Crossref before this session, or obviously do not raise your hand in the reactions panel if you have not heard of Crossref before or have never done anything with our services. So yeah, this is a call for everybody on the call. I see no hands raised yet. All right, perhaps that is the case, that we may not have too many people that have been familiar with Crossref before. That is an interesting and very nice to be chatting to you all. Thank you for joining, because we'll be covering in some detail different ways in which you can participate in Crossref, and specifically how you can participate in the in creating and then also using our research Nexus. And so a few words about that. So like others, this is not individually a Crossref's vision. Many people in the scholarly communications ecosystem envision this rich and reusable open network of relationships connecting research organizations, people, things, actions, basically everybody involved in making scholarship happen. And that kind of network is a scholarly record that the global community can build on forever for the benefit of society. And so at Crossref, we dubbed this open network of connections between all the actors and outputs and everything in between in the scholarly ecosystem, a research nexus. And this is about how we can use metadata to make those connections, to understand where, almost trace the development of an idea and merging it or flow of it being built upon to create new ideas and avenues of discovery and scholarship. And also, you can track and trace and learn a lot from who has funded different strands of research, or where things have been, or who might have been citing or building upon the works of previous actors. And many institutions can also find it useful to use those kind of connections and the metadata to help with things like assessment or even futurescaping and planning for future funding or future positions. So this is what the research Nexus vision is about, connecting all the different actors and objects in the scholarly environment through the metadata. And now there is a number of different types of metadata that the members can register with Crossref for us to kind of include in the big database. And there is some basic bibliographic data like the titles and authors' names, and but also abstracts and references and other kind of identifiers available elsewhere. And as well as funding information that we're now encouraging more and more for people to include that. It is very important for the transparency of scholarship. And so that is also something that our members can capture within their metadata. You might well be familiar with ORCID. And those are the contributions via the use of ORCID identifiers for authors. We definitely encourage and enable those. And we also collect affiliations And now Amanda French will cover in a second a little more about the research organizations and the ROR identifiers for them. And the way that can disambiguate the affiliations for people connected with the works. As well as license information, we have some services that allow for the checking of similarity to other works that have already been published, and as well as the kind of tracing and signaling of updates, retractions, or corrections to the works that are deposited with us, as well as recently we have started, or in the last couple of years, we started signaling the relationships, and people can now also register those kind of metadata with us. So metadata that we collect enables discoverability. It allows people to find easier the content that has been published. It also aids reproducibility because it gives more the metadata gives the detail of different factors that have been at play in when the research or any other type of scholarship has been delivered. And the research and editorial integrity as well as reporting and assessment. And the latter I have already, I think, mentioned in the context of the Research Nexus. However, that metadata performs best and can really deliver on those promises and those benefits when it meets certain principles. So it has to be compatible for users, whether they are people or machines, to use it. It needs to be complete, as in reflecting the content in a fullest and most comprehensive way. It also needs to be credible, so it has to be continually discoverable and has some longevity. And it needs to be curated. There needs to be an owner for the metadata, for the records, who will be maintaining that over time. And why is it important that the metadata is complete and really of good quality, the metadata that is being submitted or registered with Crossref? Well, it is because everybody across the scholarly ecosystem can then use that data because it's open. There are being tools that are being delivered and designed to take advantage of that data and deliver services and benefits to different types of organizations. From over profiling tools to library databases to anything in between that can really help progress scholarship. So it's kind of a virtuous circle of perpetuating and helping to build upon the scholarship that has already been delivered. All right. And now I shall invite my colleague Isaac to say a few more words and more detail about the different ways in which everybody, and especially members of Crossref, can build the Research Nexus together, so they can build and contribute to the large network of connections and relationships between works and people and organizations in the scholarly ecosystem. Isaac, over to you.
Thanks, Kora. My name is Isaac Farley. I'm the technical support manager here at Crossref. And as Kora said, I'm going to talk about how the Research Nexus is built, so how this rich and reusable open network of interconnected relationships gets formed. And Kora said at the beginning that DOIs, next slide, Kora, that DOIs are, the Crossref is more than just DOIs, but I think it's important to talk about DOIs and how they kind of form a foundational layer, and the metadata that's registered with us forms a foundational layer on which we build this Research Nexus. So I wanted to talk a bit about DOIs. So this is what a DOI looks like. You may have seen it out in the world. A DOI link is composed of 3 sections. So you can see on the slide, there's a red part. That red part is called the resolver address. Each DOI is an identifier, but it's also an actionable link. We call that link a DOI link. This means that you can that you can click this link or you can put it into a browser and resolve the DOI itself and go to the content itself. And as Kora mentioned, across our entire corpus, we have over 1 billion clicks on these DOIs per month. So there's a lot of people and machines who are reviewing, citing, reading this content. The blue part of the DOI is called the prefix, which is assigned to each member when they join. And it's assigned in this format, 10 dot, and that 10 dot is followed by either 4 or 5 numerals. When we first began assigning prefixes, we assigned prefixes with 4 numerals, like you can see on your screen, 10.1006. That's a very early member. And as we have grown over time, you'll see prefixes now with 5 numerals after that 10 dot. There's just been many, many members who have joined and a lot of content that's been registered with us. The yellow part of the DOI is called the suffix, and this is the DOI. This is the part of the DOI that is assigned by the member, and it is unique for each specific content item. As Kora said as well, to date, we've had over 148 million DOIs registered with Crossref, and those DOIs range from journal articles, books and book chapters, conference papers, reports, preprints, grants, and on and on. And these DOIs are designed to be persistent, so they're forever linking to the content registered with us. So they're predictable. You know how to get to your content if you click or resolve a DOI. So that really forms a consistent, predictable foundation for the research nexus. So the next question is, how do members register content with us? And I don't want to go into too much detail here, but members are the ones who register DOIs with us. They include more than just a DOI and that resolution URL when they register metadata with us. And Kora talked a little bit about this, the types of metadata that are included in a registration are titles, maybe a journal name, authors, affiliations, or ROR IDs, ORCID IDs, which identify the person or the contributor, funding information, licensing information, and on and on and on. So it's a really rich record that tells a comprehensive story about that work or that content item. And metadata about that content is registered with Crossref in a markup language called XML. All of our metadata records are registered in XML, and when members register metadata with us, they can choose whether or not they want to send that metadata to us as XML directly. And some members who are technically inclined or interested or have the resources to produce XML, they do register that content directly with us as XML. And some members just don't care to learn XML, and we have helper tools that we provide so that they can learn so they can register their content just by inputting metadata into the fields, and then we convert that metadata to XML behind the scenes. Our web deposit form is one example of a helper tool that helps members register metadata for their content, and then there's also the very popular OJS platform that was created by and hosted by PKP, the Public Knowledge Project. And the OJS platform has a Crossref plugin that allows members to input metadata and then register that content with us at Crossref. So there are different avenues in which these DOIs and their metadata get registered with us, and that's important to know that members have different options in registering that content. So now that the DOIs have been registered and the XML is stored in our system, we begin creating and connecting works. And so one of them, this is really in our name, Crossref. Reference linking was one of the reasons why Crossref was founded. So this reference linking makes it possible for readers to follow a DOI link in a reference list to that work for the location of the full text document on a member's publishing platform or on their website. And just that connection, the ability to see who's citing, how they're citing a work, builds this rich network that enhances the scholarly communications online And like I said before, the DOIs are persistent, they're predictable, they're reliable, they don't break over time. And so these links stay connected. And so our best practice when members join Crossref, we require that they begin establishing these reference links within 18 months of joining Crossref. And it's a core obligation of joining Crossref. We want these links to be created between journal articles, whether they're new and current journal articles or backfile records. And then these references are also linked for non-journal content items such as books, conference proceedings, reports, etc. And these DOIs are displayed in a way that matches our display guidelines. So we ask members to conform to a specific way that DOI should be displayed on these references, so that they look consistent, and when you find them and see them out in the world, they're again predictable, and you can recognize them. So I'm going to put a link in the chat that is just a link to our display guidelines in case you're interested. Okay. And so on the next slide, I'm going to show you there's an example here of what this reference linking looks like. And like I said, this is an obligation for Crossref members. So there is a lag when members join. They do have some time before they have to get their reference links looking like this. But if you're working with a Crossref member, this is what their references should look like. You should see links where you can actually form these connections. So our members should be linking reference lists, and they should be using DOIs where DOIs are available. Not all content has DOIs or has DOIs yet, but the DOIs, if they are available and out in the world, they should be linked in the reference lists here. Yeah, and you can see on this list, this has a great example of these links being made by the DOI. So prior to Crossref, publishers used to sign these individual and complicated agreements between each other to agree to link to each other's content. And this wasn't really a sustainable practice. As publishing grew, Crossref kind of formed that central place where references were connected. And so the purpose of those connections are to form that basis for the research nexus, but then also there's reciprocity involved in this reference linking. So if members are linking to content, that link makes the content discoverable, and Crossref kind of serves as a clearinghouse for negotiating contract reciprocal agreements between members. So members say that they will serve their references and link their references. And it's kind of a I scratch your back, you scratch my back situation where this is just the expectation. And again, you as an end user, you can find the content and always be able to link to it. Also helps with discoverability. I think Kora mentioned this earlier as well. DOIs don't break if they're implemented correctly, and readers will always be able to find the content they're looking for on each site. Citedby. So Crossref members tell us what their papers are referencing by including their references in the metadata they register with us. So what I just showed you on the previous screen was reference linking. That's an obligation, but members can also register that reference metadata in the XML that they submit to us. When members do that, they can participate in a service called Citedby. And other Crossref members who use the Citedby service can query metadata to see which sources are citing their own content, and then display the counts and links for the citing work on their website. The Citedby service complements rather than replaces other databases and search capabilities like Google Scholar, Scopus, and Web of Science. And there are no fees to our members to participate in what we call Citedby. The service is open to all members, and while depositing references is not a requirement of Crossref, it is highly encouraged because it forms those rich connections between records. So when members register references, it helps us make that connection that we're talking about, so that we have this interconnected web that tells a comprehensive story about how works are connected. So let me show you an example of what this cited by looks like on the next slide. So by clicking on a list of cited by matches, you can see that items that have gone forward to reference the article you are reading, which helps end users find relevant research related to this work over time. There are many online citation indexing services and databases, but what is different about cited by is that it lets our members display the cited by links of their content on their own website in a way that they wish. So it also only counts the citations registered with Crossref. So citations of DOIs from, say, other registration agencies are not included in the in Crossref cited by counts. But cited by as a whole benefits readers of the content because they can get a sense of how often the content has been cited and can easily click to get the links to the citing content. And then that information about how often something has been cited is useful information for publishers, obviously for authors, for research institutions, funders, and everyone within the scholarly ecosystem. So cited by is a really core feature for telling those stories and making those connections. The next thing is our funder registry. So our funder registry provides a free, open, and unique registry of persistent identifiers for grant-giving organizations. You can download and check the list manually. You can use the funder registry search, which I'll show you in a second, or you can even do this in bulk using our REST API. So we have many ways that the funder registry can be interacted with and used. No matter which way you choose, the funder registry provides you with unique persistent identifiers for funders, and that are included in the metadata that is registered with us. So again, this is part of the record and helps tell that story about interconnectedness and about end-to-end journey of a record. So on the next slide, you'll see this is an example of that funder search I was telling you about, and this is a way for a user to see a view of publications that have resulted from a grant from a specific funder. So you can come along to our funding data search at search.crossref.org/funding, enter a funder name, and see all the publications that cite that funder. This is a huge benefit, obviously, to the funders themselves, particularly those who have open access mandates and want to be able to check that authors are complying with those terms. And so it's a big step for us, and it's fairly new, the funder registry in the last few years. And then in addition to this, we are also have registration of grant IDs and ROR IDs, which are identifiers for research organizations, which Amanda French will talk about further shortly. But all of this makes it easier for funders to track and then link the results of one grant with future research outputs. And we have a growing number of funders who are joining Crossref as members so that they can register identifiers for grants with us. So you can see who's funded a grant. You can see how that grant then appears in research outputs like conventional journal articles or books, conference proceedings, on and on and on. So again, you get that end-to-end story of how works are connected, how they're connected to organizations, how they're connected to people, and on and on. Kora mentioned Crossmark in her introductory statements. So research does not stand still. Even after publication, articles can be updated with supplementary data or with corrections. Works get retracted or withdrawn or corrected. So Crossmark allows us to continue to provide up-to-date information about records. So there are two parts to using Crossmark for our members. They register the information in the metadata itself within Crossref fields within the XML. And secondly, members can also include what's called a Crossmark widget on their website or landing pages so that readers can click on this widget and get a link to the most up-to-date version of the content. So I'll show you what that looks like on the next slide. So this is an example of Crossmark in action. This record doesn't have any current updates on it, but you can see the document is current. It's green. It's got this little check mark on it. It displays a link to the publisher maintained version, which in this case, again, is current. And you can see that there's some additional publication information in this record. The Crossref metadata and the widget allows members to tell a richer story about the DOI in question. So you can see there's some information about the Crossref DOI link, about their update policy, about when the DOI was published. So it's right on the landing page for the DOI and just provides additional context for the record as a whole. Next, I'm going to talk about similarity check. So our members have an opportunity to participate in similarity check, and this service offers reduced rates for access to Authenticate. It's a tool from Turnitin, which enables our members to check submitted manuscripts for similarity to existing published content. And Authenticate has this huge database of published academic and general web content that they can check manuscripts against. So our members get that reduced rate access to the tool as they provide a centralized way for Turnitin to index their own already published work in the Authenticate database. And when our members participate, it just enriches the tool further. So that's why Authenticate and Turnitin provide a discount to our members. But members participate by including full text URLs for similarity check in the metadata they provide to us, and then Turnitin indexes that content. And this means that that service is only available to existing Crossref members who are already registering content with us. And then they include the full text URLs and the similarity check content they register with us. And on the next slide, you can see what similarity check kind of looks like in practice. So once a member has registered their own published content with Crossref and then included those similarity check URLs in the metadata they register with us and the XML that's registered with us, they're then eligible to use the similarity check service to check manuscripts that they are considering publishing. So they'll be provided with login credentials for Authenticate, and then they can check those manuscripts against a database of published content. They receive what's called a similarity report showing the level of similarity between the manuscript and already published content, and it helps them further investigate and ascertain how similar this work is to other work, and then understand the context of that similarity score and what it's telling them. For example, a high degree of similarity between a preprint may be acceptable. You think about the preprint, which gets its own DOI, and then the version of record. There may be a lot of similarity between that preprint and that version of record, and that's acceptable. That high degree of similarity may just indicate a well-researched article with lots of references, but it may also indicate a problem. So there's nuance there that must be investigated. It's important that our members don't just set a percentage of similarity at which they're going to reject an article, and instead take into consideration that full context of the work itself. So this tool, Similarity Check, provides that additional context and, again, helps tell that story about how works are connected. So yeah, I've shared a lot here. To learn more about anything that I've discussed today, check the links on this slide here. I also encourage you to follow up with any questions or comments you may have in our community forum at community.crossref.org. It's a growing community space. We love to hear from members, users, just people out in the world who want to learn more about Crossref. So please interact with us there. I'm going to turn this over to Amanda to talk about further exploring the research nexus in the next step of this presentation. Amanda, take it away.
Thank you so much, Isaac. I'll just introduce myself quickly. I am Amanda French. I am Technical Community Manager for ROAR, the Research Organization Registry, which I will tell you a little bit about later on. But yes, in this section, I want to talk about using all of this information that Crossref provides. Next slide. So of course, what Crossref does is to provide an incredibly rich 148 million large record of information about scholarly publication, data sets, journal articles, books, white papers, reports, all kinds of things. And so that information is of tremendous interest to many people, many organizations, many analysts. So you as an individual can look up individual articles on the Crossref website or in other interfaces. Organizations can also use this information. Very often machines use our APIs to not just analyze our information, but bring it into other systems and use it there, slice it, dice it, do all kinds of things with all this information. We also publish public data files. As you can imagine, these are very, very large files. So while individuals can download and use them, it can be very difficult to work with them. So often those are primarily used by machines as well. But essentially all of those 148 million records are freely available to the public for whatever use they like, bringing into their own systems, looking things up one at a time, or using them at a large scale way. Next slide. Here we have just a screenshot of the Crossref website where you can look up items in just a regular web interface by title, by DOI, by ORCID. Oops, pardon me 1 second. Excuse the barking dog. Next slide, please. Well, we can, that's the live version of the Crossref search. I mean, I suppose we can do a live search there if you like. Or we can just go on to the next slide. But I encourage you to try that out for yourself. But I wanted to talk a little bit about our REST API, which is the primary sort of machine interface for Crossref. We have actually many different APIs, but this is one of the primary ones. Whenever members register DOIs with Crossref, that record will appear in the REST API within 20 minutes, typically. We have many coding libraries available for people to work with this API. We have what we call a polite REST API, where people can use the API and identify who they are. That's not required. We have many, many sort of anonymous users of our API, but if you like, you can just put an email in your request, and that will mean that you get slightly more reliable service because we do get so much traffic on our REST API that sometimes it's a sort of a massively globally used service, and so sometimes there's quite a bit of traffic on it. We have documentation for using the API at the link given on this slide. Next slide, and I'm going to show you some examples of how you can use the Crossref API to look things up. So Isaac has helpfully on the Crossref community forum provided a really lovely guide to using the REST API, and he's given some sample queries that we're going to show here. That link is given at the bottom of this slide. I'm sure the slides will be shared afterward, so you can look at this. But if you you can go to the community forum for Crossref right now and take a look at that. Next slide. So here, if you look at that link at the top of this slide, that is an API request. If you've never before submitted an API request in a browser, that is something you can do. The data is returned in the form of JSON. So if you do have a browser plugin that can show you JSON in a nice, attractive, pretty way like this, that can help. I happen to use Firefox, which returns the data in this way. But really that link at the top is an API request, and it functions pretty much just like a URL. So you can see that the first part of that URL is api.crossref.org. That is where we are querying. And this particular query is saying, hey, Crossref, please show me all of the works that are associated with the prefix 10.35195. And here is just part of the first of those of the results list. You can see that there are 93 results for this particular query. And I've just shown you part of the first one from the editorial group Las Tunas University. Next slide, please. Here's another API query. Again, these are all linked to from that post on the Crossref community forum. Here, we're asking the Crossref API to show us all works registered with a particular ORCID ID. I'm sure most of you are familiar with ORCID IDs, which are disambiguation identifiers for individuals. This one happens to be the ORCID ID for Isaac. It's Isaac's own ORCID. And so we are seeing here a publication that Isaac has registered with Crossref. Next slide. Here's another slightly more complicated sample query of the Crossref API. And believe me, there are many, many kinds of things you can do with the Crossref API. This, again, is a sample from Isaac's post. And this particular query is asking for the top 10 most cited DOIs for a particular prefix. And you can see here, so it's a request to the Crossref API. There's the prefix. It's asking for the works associated with that particular prefix, and then it's sorted by the referenced by count, and then that select in the URL is really just saying, show us only the DOI, the title, and the is referenced by count. And then at the end there, you'll see the rows equal 10. That means just bring us the first 10 results. So there's all kinds of things like you can do. This is just the beginning, just some very basic queries that you can do for the API. So if you'd like to play around with that, please visit that post. Next slide, please. So we do have actually a brand new feature. This is very much kind of in development still. We have we're releasing a new kind of way of query. It's essentially a new branch of the API, you could say. It's like a building, and it's like sort of a new room that we've added onto the building. So we have a relationships API that we are testing out. And what this is doing is bringing together metadata records from several places where they're located in Crossref data. So you can play with this. I have a link to the post, again, announced on the Crossref community forum. We have documentations for that. And I've kind of shown you here with this square to cube. This is kind of the way I think of it. It's sort of like a 3-dimension, the relationships API is to the current REST API a little bit like a cube is to a square. It's really, it's denser. It's really more related to our research network vision. It's showing relationships between items that are registered with Crossref. So we have just one example on the next slide, if you could. We do have documentation for that. One thing to know about the relationships API is that right now, because it is still in testing, it's only working with a very, very small percentage of Crossref metadata. So, once we launch it into production, you will be able to use it to query and analyze all of Crossref metadata in the way that you can with the production API. But for right now, this is just test data. So the results for this particular query are quite small. This particular query is asking for all works funded by the American Cancer Society, which has a particular funder ID. And you can see in the structure of that URL there, we're looking for a particular object ID, which is the funder ID for the American Cancer Society, and then looking for a relationship type, which is in this case a funder. So if you can see the results in the screenshot there, It's got 3 results. It would have more if it were using the full set of Crossref metadata, but we've got 3 results, which are DOIs, probably journal articles, reports, something like that, which have been funded by the American Cancer Society. So it's going to be a very, very powerful way of analyzing the massive amounts of metadata that Crossref captures. Okay, next slide. So those are just some ways you can, as an individual, look at and query the Crossref API. And again, it's hard to overstate how many sort of programmatic uses of this massive set of metadata there are. Many databases that you visit are probably using Crossref metadata in some way or other, or some of the services that Isaac went over. But the research nexus, as Kora explained, is kind of, I always think of it as it's both an aspiration and an ideal and a description of the way things already are. Scholarly communication is a vast, dense network. Things are already linked to each other, but they can always be linked to each other more. And Crossref, can't build a research nexus alone. We rely on community partners. We rely on collaborations with other organizations in scholarly communications. And so what I'm going to do in this section is just give you a very quick overview of only some of the few ways in which Crossref is collaborating with other organizations and sponsoring community initiatives to help, I was thinking of, make this research nexus even more dense than it already is. Okay, next slide, please. So this is just an overview of what I'm going to be talking about for the next few slides. I will have very little time to go into any of these in detail, but some of the kinds of initiatives that Crossref either begins or participates in have to do with general principles and best practices in scholarly communication and scholarly publishing generally. We work with other organizations that are important in scholarly communication, small organizations, big organizations, all kinds of organizations. Crossref sponsors many initiatives, and we have many programs to expand Crossref membership globally and to increase understanding of what Crossref does around the world. Next slide. So Crossref is a convener. We convene groups a lot of the time. Isaac talked about the fact that Crossref is this sort of central place for publishers to, make one set of agreements so that they don't have to continually talk to each other. We are a hub in many ways, and these are just some of the initiatives, recent initiatives in which Crossref has served that purpose of being a kind of a central hub, a central convener of discussion groups and working groups. So the principles of open scholarly infrastructure were co-written by Crossref staff, and Crossref is a signatory to them. That's essentially, it's a set of pledges relating to governance, sustainability, and preservation or insurance for infrastructure initiatives like Crossref. Metadata 2020 was an initiative to just sort of really encourage people to improve the metadata that they provide to registrars like Crossref, but in general other initiatives as well. And then we have many working groups, advisory groups, and interest groups on all kinds of topics that are related to initiatives that are important for scholarly communication. Next slide. Some of the organizations that we partner with, it's not even some, it's just like 3 selected organizations. We partner with many organizations on initiatives outside of just Crossref members. DOAJ, the Directory of Open Access Journals, and Crossref have signed an agreement a couple of years ago to work together to enable content from journals indexed with DOAJ to be more easily identified through the use of Crossref metadata. So it's good for the entire ecosystem of scholarly communication initiatives like this. We work on a number of initiatives with ORCID. One of the most important is ORCID Auto Update, in which we enable publications with Crossref DOIs to be automatically added to ORCID author profiles, which is very, very nice. If you do have an ORCID profile, you can just log into it and see, oh my gosh, yes, I did publish that. I didn't even have to add it myself. Crossref has done that for me. We talked a little bit about partnerships with PKP and the very popular system OJS. PKP and Crossref, there is a Crossref plugin for OJS that is very widely used, but not only that, which enables you, if you are an OJS user, to register DOIs. And even beyond that, PKP has a program where they are willing to sponsor OJS users for Crossref membership, which can really help if there are financial, administrative, or technical barriers to people becoming Crossref members. Next slide. Crossref tends to, select certain initiatives that are of particular importance at this time. And right now, Crossref is concentrating on 3 initiatives in particular. The first of these is grant registration, which I think we've mentioned a couple of times before. Typically people, if you know what a DOI is at all, you probably think of it as a pointer to a journal article, but there are many, many content types that a DOI can point to. And fairly recently, we have been encouraging funders to register DOIs for grants, which is really helpful because obviously the public wants to know who has funded such and such a piece of research. And funders themselves want to be able to link their funding to published research. So one of the first steps in that is to say, okay, we need an identifier for a particular grant so that we can then link that to published research. So we are encouraging funders to register DOIs for grants. There's an example on this slide of a landing page for a grant. You can see the grant DOI, you can see the internal grant ID, when the grant ran from, when it began, when it ended, and who it was given to, and all of that kind of thing. And of course, who the funder was, which is a funder ID. So again, we have identifiers for funders, which in this case is the Wellcome Trust, but we also have identifiers for the grant that they funded. And that makes it easier for people to discover these grants, and it makes it easier for machines and software to analyze them, find and analyze them. The initiative that I actually work on full time is ROAR, the Research Organization Registry. I could talk for another 20 minutes only about ROAR, but I will just give you a very brief overview. If you know what ORCID is, that ORCID is a unique identifier for individuals. ROAR is an open, globally persistent, unique identifier for research organizations. So universities, companies that do research, any organization that kind of is involved in scholarly publishing, scholarly communication, we give that a unique identifier. And that again helps, especially computational methods of exchanging data and exposing it for discoverability and analysis. A third initiative that Crossref is heavily involved in right now is data citation. So we are encouraging researchers to cite data, not just published articles, not just published books, in their reference lists, and then encouraging all of the systems that ingest these publications to support those kinds of data citations so that we can see, again, ensure connections between these research outputs, specifically, for instance, data sets that come out of funded research, perhaps, and publications and organizations and researchers. So, increasingly, the journal article or the book is not really or even the conference paper or the report is not all that people want to see. They want to see the underlying data behind that. So when people publish an article or something and they say, here's the data that I consulted to use this article, or here's the data that I produced in this research, that becomes really, really important for others to be able to see and use that data. Next slide. So finally, I just wanted to mention, and Kora may want to add some things to what I say here. We have a number of initiatives and programs that are really meant to ensure that this vision of the research nexus is truly global. I mean, I think we all know that, you know, Western countries have tended to have outsized importance in scholarly publishing, but I do think that that's changing. And so we've, one of the first programs that we've had, and one of the most widely used programs that we've had, is our sponsors program, which enables small organizations to join Crossref as full members with all the accompanying rights and responsibilities through the sponsorship of a larger organization. Most of Crossref's roughly 20,000 members are sponsored by another organization, and these smaller organizations do not pay fees to Crossref, although the sponsor themselves may ask for fees. But this is one of the major ways in which we've encouraged smaller publishers, organizations to join Crossref, and it has been remarkably successful. But we also have a new global equitable membership program, our GEM program, which offers relief from membership and content registration fees for members in the least economically advantaged countries around the world. Members in GEM eligible countries do not pay Crossref membership or content registration fees to either Crossref or a sponsor. So it's entirely free membership in the GEM program. And then one of the things that I think we're most proud of and most enjoy, I think we may have some Crossref ambassadors on the call today, is our ambassadors program. So Crossref ambassadors are volunteers that help, I think of it as translate Crossref to others in their region by doing outreach activities in countries from Azerbaijan to Zimbabwe and everything in between. So again, we think that this is very, very important to make sure that Crossref's activities and membership are truly global, because how can you have a really rich research nexus if you're only concentrated in the West? Kora?
Yes, thank you, Amanda, for introducing those programs. That is quite true. I think Amanda has, made it all very accurate in terms of describing or introducing those. If there are any questions about any one of those, either the sponsors or ambassadors or the GEM program, then I'll be very happy to take them later. I think there was already one in Q&A about some challenges that we've identified, and certainly those programs are addressing some of those challenges. Maybe one thing to add about the sponsors program is that as much as it is helpful with some of the financial difficult barriers to joining Crossref, very often sponsors also offer some level of technical support for those members. Not all sponsors do, but many do. And that supports organizations that don't necessarily have that kind of in-house in-house person or capacity to be able to register their content or maintain the records themselves. All right, and that concludes our presentation. So as I've mentioned before, we obviously are very open to questions about any part of what we just said. I know it was quite a lot of content to take in. So, if you remember, we talked about what Crossref is initially and introduced this idea of a research nexus, which kind of is meant to capture and make it possible to explore connections in this rich network of metadata, kind of connections between objects, organizations, and people in the scholarly ecosystem. And Isaac has then talked us through different ways in which organizations can participate in building that research nexus by registering the metadata and connecting it to different in different ways. And finally, also Amanda talked about the ways of exploring the research nexus that we have today, and also signaling some things related to the relationships API endpoint, which kind of signals the idea of exploring a richer network of those connections in the future, and as well as mentioned a number of different community initiatives that Crossref is involved in. So if any of those raises questions for you, please don't be shy. You can type those questions in the Q&A or a chat, or I presume you could also raise your hand to be able to ask those questions live. I think there is currently a question in the Q&A that I wonder if Isaac, you might want to try and answer it live.
Sure.
How does Crossref deal? Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for starting to read that. I'll read it too. How does Crossref deal with errors or duplications in the metadata associated with DOIs? A couple of ways. So you can imagine we have 148 million records registered with us. Some of those are typed by hand by humans. Others are transformed by machines. There's going to be errors when you have a corpus that has 148 million records in it. The first thing we do is we do not charge our members to make updates. So we want the metadata to be accurate. We want it to be rich. So the only time that we ever charge our members is the initial registration. So if they come back and edit it, update it, correct it, we do not charge for that. The second thing is again, it can be difficult to automate a check where we say, this registration looks similar to a previous registration, and therefore we're going to reject it. So what we do is when a registration comes in where the bibliographic metadata that's registered with us looks similar to bibliographic metadata for another DOI, thus indicating maybe a duplicate registration here, we flag that. There are examples of legitimate registrations that look like duplicates. So if you think of errata, we just don't have a lot of metadata that would be registered for errata. So instead of failing those registrations, we flag them to our members, and we call those conflicts. So we have an entire process. We have for members to review DOIs that are, quote, in conflict, and they can set, if they have indeed registered a duplicate DOI for content, which does happen. It's less than 1% of all DOIs that are registered with Crossref, but it does happen where a member comes along and accidentally registers 2 DOIs for the same content item. They may do that on accident. Sometimes that happens because content transfers between owners or stewards. We do have a mechanism for them to signal to the world that one DOI will be maintained going forward. We call that the primary DOI, and the other will be the alias DOI. But DOIs are designed to be unique. DOIs are not designed to be duplicated, so we have to have ways of working with that. And admittedly, we have, this is something that we're talking about internally about duplication and registration of duplicate DOIs and ways that we can improve our own process. So we do have an existing process. We have reports to flag this to members. It does still happen. And so I think for us, we're trying to be flexible and come up with improvements to the process. But those are a couple of ways that we work with metadata errors. And another thing that happens is oftentimes users will report those errors to us as well, and they'll say this metadata is incorrect. Maybe they're the author and their name is misspelled, or the pagination on their work is misspelled. So those metadata users, authors, contributors, maybe other researchers or metadata users will say, something in here looks inconsistent. In those cases, we get involved and do contact the owner or steward of the record, the entity that's responsible for the record, and ask them to review and make corrections. So a manual process, we're hoping to further automate that and improve that. But we do have mechanisms in place for errors, reviewing errors, and taking action on those errors. Good question.
Thank you, Isaac. All right. I don't see any more. I don't see any more questions at the moment. However, there has been a question in the Q&A before about what are the main challenges to implementing the DOI system, and I suppose there are different types of persistent identifiers, but the Crossref DOI specifically. Well, I think one of the challenges that we encounter is to make sure that organizations who do or who wish to register their content and assign DOIs understand that it is the metadata that provides the main value for their records. So DOIs by themselves are essential, but they are not sufficient to create all that rich network of connections and actually improve discoverability for the content. And it is important to remember that. I think, the other part of the challenge is obviously for organizations who may not have the technical capacity or the financial means to participate. And for that purposes, I think the slide just before that Amanda has kind of shown before, those are our programs which help us address those issues. So in terms of the financial difficulties, obviously the GEM program is the latest addition for those organizations who are based in the least financially advantaged countries in the world. But also the sponsors program helps with relieves some of the pressure of the fees, as well as in many cases provide a level of technical support. And then our network of ambassadors are there kind of on hand to help colleagues from their regions, often offering advice in local language and being able to troubleshoot with you to help kind of use the different services that we have on offer to help participate more fully in the research nexus, as has been reported before. All right, I can see that we have now a question that has been asked in Spanish, so I shall wait for Alex to help us translate it.
While we're waiting for that translation, there were a couple of other questions asked, Kora. There were questions about how does Crossref interoperate with services such as GitHub, and for example, do researchers that work with software such as R, how do they work with the metadata that is registered with us? And then on the front end, if we do allow researchers to interoperate with us, are there specific practices that members need to be mindful of when depositing data with us, and how would the DOI registration process work? So I'll just talk about that a little bit. So the registration or depositing of metadata must fit into a comprehensive schema, and we outline that to our members. So I think that for our members who are registering content, the thing that we would say to them is, register the richest record that you possibly can. Include contributors, include ORCID IDs, include abstracts, include your references, those things that are connecting, include ROR IDs, those things that are making connections with other entities, other works, and those create this rich record that can then be used by metadata users. And so let me just put a link into what our schema looks like. This is the most recent version of our schema, just so you can see. I don't expect everyone to read through that, but it's very comprehensive. It's thorough. Our members must follow this schema in order to register content with us. And then so they follow that schema, and then we output the results of what they've registered in two languages, JSON and XML, so that it can be used, it can be analyzed, and people can do cool things with it. And we're open, as you've heard us talk throughout this. We're an open organization that provides open infrastructure. So then people in the community can do cool things like build programs like this one that I put into the chat. So absolutely, we try to enable the community to use our metadata. It's free, it's open, and then enrich what we've already provided. And so yeah, absolutely, we do that. So that's the answer to that question that was asked.
Thank you, Isaac. All right, I can see another question that has been asked before. So one is here about in what way can DOI contribute to accessibility in scholarly communication? Is there a way, is there any way to improve on accessibility? Of course, as we've mentioned, the metadata that is being registered with Crossref is being made openly available. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that the full text of articles is openly available. We do encourage, for example, the openness of abstracts, and we have made all of our references openly available as of last year. However, obviously, we cannot stipulate the changes in any business models that our members may adopt. So whilst in terms of accessibility, there isn't DOIs by themselves or even the metadata isn't necessarily always the way to improve the access to the articles, but it does help discoverability. So the reference linking and the site and the cited by services that Isaac mentioned before, they help people find the article. Whether or not that article is actually accessible to a person is a different story. Another thing that, there are other services that allow finding a version of a published work, whether that is a book or a scholarly article or any other format. There are tools being made in the community that allow you to find a version of that. You can never tell whether that, I suppose it depends on, for example, if there is a preprint or if there is a version of an article deposited in a institutional repository. There are services out there, such as, I don't know, I'm not quite sure if I can list them all, so I wouldn't be able to mention a single one, but there are services out there that will allow you to potentially find a version of the article that is connected to something that you may not be able to access. So that the final version of the article might not be open, but there might be versions of it that have been made available in different ways by the authors or the institutions that have been involved in producing those. So in that sense, metadata can help with identifying ways of accessing some of the works.
We also, thanks, Kora. We also received a question about artificial intelligence, machine learning, and similarity check. Remember earlier in the presentation, I talked about similarity check. It's that service that we work with Turnitin on that gives our members access to a tool called Authenticate, which enables members to check submitted manuscripts for similarity to existing other published content in the world. And so there was some question about the growth of AI and machine learning and its impact on, and then analyzing that in similarity check. And similarity check is powered by Turnitin, and Turnitin is working on an AI detection tool that will plug into the existing Authenticate tool. So our members who are using similarity check will have access to this, and that AI detection tool should be available later this year in a trial period, and then the tool as a whole should go live in 2024. So if you're using similarity check or interested in similarity check and this AI detection tool or machine learning detection tool is something of interest to you, keep aware, because we should be announcing its arrival in a few months.
Thank you, Isaac. I can also see a question from Felipe Novinsky about language support. So currently, Crossref supports metadata deposit with multiple titles for a given article, but the multilingual metadata seems limited. So the question is whether it would be possible for Crossref to extend schema to allow more multilingual attributions being made within the records. So it's certainly something that is on our minds. And we have recently had a little consultation about what our members would wish in terms of priorities in our metadata, and support for multilingual metadata has been one of the themes that have appeared, if not necessarily the most prominent. I wonder, Isaac, if you have any more information, kind of technically, how multilingual content is being treated, in what are the most effective ways of dealing with multilingual metadata as it stands.
Yeah, you saw earlier when Amanda was presenting, she was showing some of the records in my ORCID ID. So the scientific society I worked at before coming to Crossref, we published a fair amount of multilingual content, and there was a couple ways that we did that. But so I think that, you know, when we think about DOIs as citation identifiers, especially for traditional things like journal articles, we want to make sure that that the DOI is registered in a way that it can be cited and create those connections for the record. And right now, the way we encourage members to register multilingual content is to register the content in the language that it's most likely to be cited. If you're registering, let's say, an article in, just as an example that I worked on in the past, and this seems like a good example for the call today, an article that maybe is published in Portuguese, and then it is translated into Spanish and then into English. Me as a reader, as an end user, I'm going to be reading that in my native language, English, and that's how I would be citing the work. So for that, in that example, the best practice right now, as it currently exists, would be to register a DOI in Portuguese that provides the information in Portuguese, a DOI in Spanish that provides the metadata in Spanish, and a DOI in English that provides the metadata in English, and then linking the three together using a metadata element called a relationship, and saying that these three things are this is the original work, and these are the Spanish version is a translated version of that work, and the English version is a translated version of that work. And that link, again, tells that story that these are related work, but me as the end user would cite the English version. Maybe a native Spanish speaker would cite the Spanish version, yada, 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 et cetera. So that's how we currently work on it. And I know that there's some, it's complicated, that's a complicated process technically that I've just described. We're here to help. And we're also, as Kora said, looking at ways that we can improve this. You can include translations in the abstract element. So you could register in that example, let's say the article's in Portuguese, that's how it's meant to be cited. And you're not distributing the translation with a DOI. You just want to include the translation of the abstract in English and Spanish. You can include that translation in the abstract using the tags like Felipe has asked in the question themselves. So again, if you have questions about any of these things, reach out to us in the community forum, community.crossref.org, and we'll provide guidance on how this can be done technically. And just know that we're thinking about this and definitely interested in making this easier for our members, especially those who are registering a lot of this multilingual content.
All right, thank you, Isaac. Oh, and thank you for dropping the forum link in the chat, Amanda. That's lovely. Is anyone aware of any more questions? Let's see any more. I wonder, Amanda, I can see that you've been sharing some links about ROAR as well. Is there anything that you wanted to add before we close about ROAR?
Not particularly. If Alex Mendonça, I know, has been a wonderful ROAR supporter. Open preprint systems is using the ROAR plugin that has been developed for OJS and OPS. We are hoping that that plugin will get some updates soon, but we did actually just hear, I don't know how many OJS users there are on the call, but the most recent ROAR community call was on Tuesday. We have those every 2 months. Those are a great way to keep up to date on what ROAR is doing. And we actually did hear a presentation from the lead developer at PKP, Alex Smecher about some of the ROR integrations in version 3.4 of OJS, which are, I think, quite interesting. They're mostly to do not so much with author affiliations, but with tracking institutional subscribers to your OJS journal. So I personally thought that was quite interesting, but some of you might think so as well. So yeah.
Thank you, Amanda. All right. Well, if there are no more further questions, I wanted to thank again everybody for joining. I hope that this has been that this has been interesting and potentially also maybe helpful to some of you. Thank you for Alex and Carolina for hosting us and kind of organizing this webinar and making it possible. And thank you to Amanda and Isaac for supporting me in sharing their vast knowledge about the different aspects that people can both participate in and explore the Research Nexus with us.